The night shift paid better and the passengers talked less, which was perfect for someone trying to disappear from his former life. For 6 years, he drove through the city's shadows without attracting attention. Until he picked up the wrong passengers and discovered that some rides lead to places darker than he'd ever imagined. Welcome to Silent Heroes. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden identities and dangerous discoveries, tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from today? And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. At 11:47 p.m. on a rainy Thursday, Marcus Cole's phone buzzed with another ride request through the Uber app. 6 years of night driving had taught him to read between the lines of pickup locations and passenger ratings, and this request had all the markers of a routine late-night fare: downtown pickup, expensive neighborhood destination, passenger rating of 4.8 stars. Marcus accepted the ride and headed toward the pickup location, a trendy club district where he'd collected hundreds of passengers over the years. At 52, Marcus looked exactly like what he was supposed to be: a reliable night shift driver who'd found steady work in the gig economy after whatever career had come before. Professional but quiet, efficient but forgettable, the kind of driver who maintained a perfect 4.9-star rating by providing excellent service without creating memorable interactions. But Marcus Cole wasn't just an Uber driver. He was former operations officer Marcus Cole, Central Intelligence Agency, with 23 years of service in covert operations that had taken him from Eastern European intelligence networks to South American drug cartels. He'd spent over 2 decades learning to gather information in hostile environments while maintaining cover identities that could withstand professional scrutiny from foreign intelligence services. Marcus's CIA career had ended not with voluntary retirement, but with a medical discharge following a bombing in Syria that had left him with chronic injuries, permanent hearing damage, and psychological trauma that made overseas operations impossible. The blast had killed 2 of his team members and hospitalized Marcus for 8 months while surgeons reconstructed his left shoulder and psychologists helped him process trauma that went far beyond physical injuries. The agency had offered desk positions, consulting roles with defense contractors, and advisory positions with federal law enforcement agencies, but Marcus needed to disappear completely from federal attention while finding work that wouldn't trigger the hypervigilance and paranoia that made normal employment impossible. Driving for Uber had been perfect cover for someone who needed to vanish from his former life. The gig economy provided cash income that couldn't be easily tracked by foreign intelligence services, required no background checks beyond basic driving records, and offered the kind of anonymous urban environment where former CIA operatives could blend into civilian life without attracting attention from hostile agents or domestic surveillance. For 6 years, Marcus had driven the night shift through Los Angeles, maintaining a perfect safety record and customer satisfaction rating while carefully avoiding the kind of curiosity that had once been essential to his survival as an intelligence officer. He developed selective blindness to passenger conversations that sounded suspicious, destination patterns that seemed unusual, and behavioral indicators that would have been valuable intelligence during his CIA years. Marcus had perfected the art of being invisible, just another middle-aged driver helping people get where they needed to go without asking questions or remembering details that might compromise his passengers' privacy. It was exactly the kind of anonymity that had allowed him to heal from 2 decades of living under constant threat in countries where discovery meant torture and death. His regular passengers included late-shift workers heading home from restaurants and hospitals, partygoers traveling between clubs and after-hours events, and business travelers catching red-eye flights from LAX. Most conversations were casual small talk about weather and traffic, but Marcus had learned to tune out even those interactions to maintain the psychological distance that made civilian life bearable. But this Thursday night was different. This Thursday night, Marcus picked up 3 passengers who made 23 years of intelligence training impossible to ignore. The passengers appeared completely normal when they entered his vehicle, well-dressed professionals in expensive suits, speaking quietly among themselves while Marcus programmed their destination into his GPS navigation system. They seemed like typical business executives heading home after a late corporate meeting, the kind of fare that usually resulted in polite silence and generous tips. But within 5 minutes of driving, Marcus realized he was listening to a conversation that shouldn't be happening in any legitimate business context. "The shipment from Portland arrived this morning," one passenger said in a tone that suggested routine commercial discussion. 12 units, all between 14 and 17 years old, all undocumented status confirmed. Marcus felt his blood chill as he processed what he'd just heard. In intelligence terminology, units referred to people, and the age specifications combined with undocumented status suggested human trafficking involving minors. Transport arrangements to final destinations? Asked the second passenger. Private aircraft to Miami tomorrow night, then international connections through established channels. The overseas buyers have already transferred 50% deposits to the offshore accounts in Grand Cayman. Marcus maintained his professional driver demeanor while his CIA training automatically began documenting details. Voices, accents, terminology, operational structure. This wasn't street-level crime or opportunistic trafficking, this was organized, sophisticated, and international in scope. What about the new West Coast facility? The third passenger inquired. Operational by next Tuesday. Judge Harrison signed off on the zoning permits yesterday. Police Chief Martinez has been briefed on security requirements for the area, and our federal contact confirmed that immigration enforcement will avoid the sector during transport periods. Marcus realized he wasn't just overhearing a trafficking operation, he was gathering evidence of corruption that reached into local judiciary, law enforcement leadership, and federal immigration agencies. This criminal network had purchased protection at multiple levels of government, making them essentially untouchable through normal law enforcement channels. The conversation continued with chilling efficiency as the passengers discussed logistics for moving human victims like they were planning corporate inventory management. References to acquisition costs, transport efficiency, and client satisfaction made Marcus sick to his stomach while simultaneously triggering the analytical mindset that had kept him alive during decades of intelligence operations. Marcus began mentally mapping the organizational structure based on conversational fragments. Local acquisition teams in Portland and other West Coast cities, transportation networks using private aircraft, offshore financial systems for international payments, and corruption networks providing protection from law enforcement interference. The ride destination was a warehouse district in East Los Angeles that Marcus had visited dozens of times for legitimate passenger pickups and drop-offs. But now he understood that some of those previous rides had probably been connected to the same trafficking network, and he'd been unknowingly providing transportation services for criminals who were destroying children's lives for profit. As Marcus navigated through late-night traffic, the passengers' conversation revealed additional details about their operation. Safe houses in residential neighborhoods where victims were held before transport, medical facilities that provided health certifications for overseas buyers, and legal services that handled documentation for international movement of people who officially didn't exist. The scope and sophistication of the operation indicated resources that went far beyond typical criminal enterprises. This was business-level organization with corporate efficiency, government protection, and international connections that probably involved diplomatic channels and foreign intelligence services. Marcus realized that infiltrating this network would require skills and resources that he hadn't used since his active CIA days. But he also realized that exposing it might be the most important operation of his entire career, not because of national security implications, but because children's lives were being destroyed by people who saw them as profitable commodities. When Marcus reached the destination warehouse, one of the passengers handed him a business card along with a cash tip that was 3 times the normal fare amount. "We'll be requiring regular transportation services," the man said with a kind of smile that belonged to people who were used to buying whatever they needed. "Discretion is appreciated and financially rewarded." Marcus looked at the business card, International Import, Export Solutions, with a phone number but no physical address listed. It was exactly the kind of front company that intelligence agencies taught operatives to recognize as criminal enterprises attempting to appear legitimate. Marcus faced a decision that would determine whether he spent his remaining years driving quietly through Los Angeles or returned to the world of covert operations that he tried to leave behind permanently. He could delete the business card, block these passengers' phone numbers in his Uber app, and pretend he'd never overheard evidence of crimes that were destroying children's lives across multiple states and international borders. Or he could do what Operations Officer Cole would have done: infiltrate the criminal organization, gather evidence of their complete network structure, and build a case that would expose a trafficking operation that was operating with protection from corrupt government officials at multiple levels. Marcus started his car and began driving toward his small apartment in Santa Monica, but his mind was already analyzing the tactical challenges of mounting a single-operator infiltration against a sophisticated criminal network that had resources, government protection, and international connections. Unlike his CIA operations, this mission would have no official backing, no diplomatic protection, no extraction teams, and no legal immunity if things went wrong. If the trafficking network discovered his real identity, they wouldn't just kill him, they would probably torture him for information about what he'd learned and who else might be investigating their operations. But Marcus had spent 23 years learning that some situations required action regardless of personal risk or official authorization. Children were being bought and sold like livestock, and the people responsible felt confident enough to discuss their crimes openly because they believed they were protected by corrupt officials and immune from prosecution. That night, Marcus began planning an operation that would be more dangerous than anything he'd attempted during his CIA career. Instead of targeting foreign intelligence assets or international terrorists, he would be investigating American criminals who had purchased protection from American officials and were using American infrastructure to traffic children to international buyers. Marcus activated communication protocols he hadn't used since his medical discharge, reaching out to former CIA colleagues who had transitioned to private sector work but maintained connections to federal law enforcement agencies. He needed intelligence on the trafficking network, financial analysis of their offshore accounts, and coordination with honest agents who could act on evidence without alerting corrupt officials. The response from his former CIA contacts was immediate and concerning. The trafficking network had been under surveillance by multiple federal agencies for over 2 years, but every investigation had been compromised by leaks from within government agencies. Honest agents suspected widespread corruption but couldn't identify which officials were providing protection to the criminal organization. Marcus realized that his accidental discovery might be the breakthrough that federal investigators needed, an inside source who could gather evidence without alerting the corruption network that protected the trafficking operation. But it would require him to accept regular rides from the traffickers while documenting their operations and identifying their government contacts. 3 days later, Marcus received his first call from the business card number. The same passenger who'd given him the card requested transportation for a business meeting in Beverly Hills, with additional stops at locations that would need to be confirmed during the ride. Marcus accepted the assignment, understanding that he was officially beginning an undercover operation that would either expose one of the largest human trafficking networks on the West Coast or get him killed by people who had demonstrated their willingness to destroy anyone who threatened their business. Before leaving his apartment, Marcus activated recording equipment that would document conversations, GPS tracking that would map locations, and emergency communication systems that would alert his federal contacts if he didn't check in at predetermined intervals. Marcus Cole, quiet Uber driver, was about to become Operations Officer Cole one final time. But this time, instead of protecting American interests against foreign threats, he would be protecting American children from predators who saw them as profit opportunities. The mission parameters were simple: infiltrate the trafficking network, identify all participants including corrupt government officials, and gather enough evidence to support federal prosecutions that would dismantle the entire operation while rescuing victims before they could be transported to international buyers. But Marcus knew that simple mission parameters often concealed complex operational challenges that could result in casualties among the people he was trying to protect. Some of the children being trafficked might be killed if the criminal network suspected they were under investigation, and some of the corrupt officials might destroy evidence or flee to countries without extradition treaties. Marcus had approximately 6 weeks to gather sufficient evidence before the trafficking network completed their current operational cycle and moved victims to international locations where rescue would become impossible. 6 weeks to penetrate an organization that had successfully evaded federal investigation for years while operating under protection from government officials whose identities remained unknown. Marcus's second ride with the trafficking network took place 4 nights later at a pickup location in downtown Los Angeles. This time, he was transporting the same 3 passengers plus 2 additional individuals who clearly held senior positions within the criminal organization. Our Portland acquisition team exceeded quotas this month, one of the new passengers reported during the ride. 18 units secured, all meeting client specifications for age, appearance, and documentation status. Marcus listened with professional detachment while internally processing the horror of what he was hearing. These people were discussing the kidnapping of children with the same casual efficiency that legitimate businesses use to discuss sales targets and inventory management. "What about the federal situation?" asked one of the original passengers. "Our contact mentioned increased surveillance activity." "Handled," replied the senior passenger. "Agent Williams at the FBI field office has been providing weekly briefings on all trafficking investigations. Any operations that come too close to our activities are redirected toward competitive organizations or terminated through budget restrictions." Marcus realized that the corruption network included active FBI agents who were sabotaging federal investigations while providing intelligence to the trafficking organization. This explained why previous law enforcement efforts had failed. The criminals were receiving advance warning of all official operations against them. The ride destination was a luxury hotel in Beverly Hills where the trafficking leadership was conducting what they referred to as a client conference. Essentially a business meeting between American traffickers and international buyers who were purchasing children for overseas markets. As Marcus dropped off his passengers, the senior member of the group handed him a larger business card with gold lettering and an address for what appeared to be a legitimate import-export company. "We're expanding our transportation requirements," the man explained. "Your services may be needed for more specialized assignments that require absolute discretion and premium compensation." Marcus understood that he was being recruited for higher-level operations within the trafficking network, possibly including direct transport of victims to airports or safe houses. It was exactly the kind of access that would allow him to document the complete operational structure while identifying rescue opportunities for children who were being held for transport to international buyers. Over the following 3 weeks, Marcus became the preferred driver for the trafficking network's leadership. His rides took him to safe houses in residential neighborhoods where victims were held, medical facilities where children received health certifications for international buyers, and government offices where corrupt officials received payments for protection services. Marcus documented everything using concealed recording equipment while maintaining his cover as a reliable driver who asked no questions and remembered nothing about passenger conversations or destinations. His CIA training allowed him to gather intelligence while appearing completely disinterested in his passengers' business activities. The breakthrough came during a ride to the federal building in downtown Los Angeles, where Marcus discovered that FBI agent Williams, who had been sabotaging trafficking investigations, was actually the brother-in-law of Judge Harrison, who had been approving zoning permits for trafficking facilities. The corruption network was built around family connections that extended into multiple government agencies. But Marcus's deepest penetration into the trafficking network also brought him closest to discovery. During a ride to a warehouse facility, one of the passengers mentioned conducting background checks on all service providers who had access to sensitive operations. "The Uber driver seems reliable," one passenger noted, "but we should verify his background before involving him in transport operations." Marcus knew that professional background investigation would eventually reveal discrepancies in his cover identity that might lead to questions about his actual history. If the trafficking network discovered his CIA background, they would realize that their operations had been compromised and might accelerate victim transport or eliminate witnesses to protect themselves. That night, Marcus activated his emergency communication protocols and contacted his federal law enforcement liaisons. "I have complete intelligence on network structure, corrupt officials, and victim locations," Marcus reported. "But my cover may be compromised within days. We need to coordinate simultaneous raids before they can destroy evidence or harm victims." The federal response was immediate. "Understood. Tactical teams are being positioned for coordinated operations. You'll need to maintain cover for 72 hours while we finalize arrest warrants and rescue protocols." Marcus realized that the next 3 days would determine whether his 6-week undercover operation resulted in the rescue of trafficking victims and the arrest of corrupt officials, or whether the criminal network would discover his identity and eliminate him before federal agents could act on his intelligence. 72 hours later, Marcus received what he knew would be his final ride request from the trafficking network. The pickup location was the same warehouse district where he'd first dropped off the passengers who had unknowingly revealed their criminal operations during casual conversation in his back seat. But this time, the passenger manifest included a different type of cargo: 5 children between the ages of 12 and 16 who were being transported to a private airfield for international flights to buyers in Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe. Marcus understood that this ride would either save 5 children from a fate worse than death or expose his cover and result in the execution of both himself and the victims he'd been trying to protect. Federal tactical teams were positioned around the transport route, but they needed Marcus to confirm victim locations before they could execute rescue operations. As Marcus arrived at the pickup location, he could see the children being loaded into a van that would follow his vehicle to the airport. They were clearly drugged, barely conscious, and completely helpless to escape from their captors. Some were crying quietly, others stared ahead with the vacant expressions of people who had experienced trauma beyond their ability to process. Marcus activated his emergency beacon while accepting the ride assignment, signaling federal teams that the final phase of the operation was beginning. He had approximately 40 minutes to transport the trafficking leadership to the airport while federal agents coordinated simultaneous raids on safe houses, government offices, and financial institutions connected to the criminal network. During the drive, Marcus listened to final operational discussions that confirmed the scope of the trafficking network's activities. Over 300 children trafficked during the past 2 years, buyers in 17 countries, corrupted officials in 6 federal agencies, and offshore financial accounts containing over $50 million in criminal proceeds. This should conclude our West Coast operations, one passenger noted. We'll be relocating primary activities to the Southeast region where our government contacts have established more secure operational parameters. Marcus realized that exposing this network wouldn't just save the 5 children in the transport van, it would prevent the trafficking organization from establishing similar operations in other regions where they plan to corrupt additional government officials and victimize hundreds more children. At 11:47 p.m., exactly 6 weeks after Marcus had first overheard trafficking discussions in his Uber vehicle, federal tactical teams executed coordinated operations across Los Angeles. Safe houses were raided, corrupt officials were arrested, and financial accounts were frozen simultaneously to prevent the criminal network from destroying evidence or fleeing to non-extradition countries. Marcus's role in the operation ended when FBI agents surrounded the airport and arrested the trafficking leadership while they were attempting to board private aircraft with their victims. The 5 children were rescued and immediately provided with medical care and psychological support services that would help them begin recovering from trauma that would affect them for the rest of their lives. But for Marcus, the real victory was measured in smaller, more personal terms. 5 children who had been destined for international sex trafficking were safe. 17 corrupt government officials who had been protecting criminal operations were facing federal charges. And a trafficking network that had operated with impunity for years had been completely dismantled. 3 months later, Marcus stood in a federal courthouse in Los Angeles, testifying in proceedings that would result in convictions for human trafficking, government corruption, and international criminal conspiracy. His identity was protected through witness security protocols, but his evidence was crucial for prosecutors seeking maximum sentences for crimes that had destroyed children's lives for profit. After the trials concluded, Marcus received an offer from the Department of Justice to join a task force investigating human trafficking networks that use transportation services and digital platforms to facilitate criminal operations. His experience demonstrated that former intelligence officers could provide unique capabilities for penetrating criminal organizations that had previously been impossible for traditional law enforcement to investigate. Marcus accepted the position, understanding that his accidental discovery during a routine Uber ride had led to the most important work of his career. Some missions found you when you weren't looking for them, and some evil required confrontation regardless of personal risk or official authorization. The trafficking network that had operated under government protection was completely destroyed, but Marcus knew that other networks were probably operating in other cities with similar protection from corrupt officials. His new position would allow him to identify and infiltrate those operations before they could destroy more children's lives. 6 years after trying to disappear from his former life as a CIA operative, Marcus had discovered that some skills were too important to abandon and some responsibilities were too significant to ignore. The transition from intelligence operations to civilian life was complete, but the mission of protecting innocent people from those who would harm them had never really ended. So now I ask you, have you ever encountered someone whose ordinary job concealed extraordinary capabilities? Someone who chose to risk everything to protect people they'd never met? Share their story in the comments, because quiet heroes like Marcus deserve to be remembered. And if this story moved you, subscribe to Silent Heroes. We're here to honor the people who serve without recognition, who understand that real heroism happens when someone chooses to confront evil regardless of personal cost. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the person driving your Uber has spent decades learning to recognize dangers that most people never see coming. And sometimes that recognition saves lives that would otherwise be lost to predators who count on society's indifference to their crimes.